researchers at the University of Pretoria are producing nanobodies that could be of groundbreaking use in rapid tests and as a treatment for COVID-19. Now, currently, antigen tests make use of conventional antibodies. They're expensive to make, and they are also temperature sensitive. In contrast, the nanobodies are not temperature sensitive, can be developed in a lab, and are a lot cheaper to use. Let's get you some more on the story now, more detail on the story. Professor Tahir Pillay is head of pathology and chemical pathology at the University of Pretoria, and he joins us now live via our video line. Professor, good morning. Thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM report. So I think perhaps as a start, for us lay people, can you explain to us the difference between nanobodies versus antibodies?
Okay. Firstly, good morning to you and your viewers. So nanobodies are basically small antibodies. So they have the same function as the antibodies that you and I produce in our bodies, but they're about 1/10 of the size of a conventional antibody. So that means they're much easier to produce, and they're more robust, and they're more temperature sensitive. And also, because of their small size, they can be produced in large quantities as compared to the normal mammalian antibodies. So, as you may recall, President Trump received about 8,000 milligrams of the conventional antibody for his COVID. Now, the cost of that would have been several $100,000. So with nanobodies, you could replicate that because you've got a smaller antibody that's cheaper to produce. That would only cost a few $1,000s. Yeah. So this has a tremendous impact on the potential for treatment, but not just treatment, but also prevention, because it is also possible to administer these nanobodies in the form of an inhalant as a powder, which can be inhaled into the lung to actually prevent COVID-19. So both prevention and treatment are two of the major impacts that this could have. And obviously cost, as I said, a fraction of the cost of producing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Professor, researchers at the University of Pretoria are producing these nanobodies. Is this a first in COVID-19 research?
So there are competitors out there. So certainly there are, because people have realized the potential of nanobodies. I mean, we started working on this several years ago, but when the pandemic happened, we switched over to SARS-CoV-2. So certainly there are other groups. I know of one in the US and certainly one group in China working on exactly the same thing in the same area, and also are almost at the same stage as we are. So naturally, this is because it's such an important development. There are other groups in the world that are working on it.
Yeah. And what are the timeframes that we're looking at for it to actually be in circulation and for us to start using this technology?
So firstly, so the two important things are, so with COVID-19, the two important things are the detection and diagnosis, and then the prevention and treatment. I think the easier one to deal with will be the detection and diagnosis. So in terms of developing a test, we've tested the prototype in the laboratory, but we need to move to clinical trials where we actually test the sample out in the field, and we're talking about several months. As for prevention and treatment, where you actually try to administer to people and actually give it as a treatment or a prevention, obviously that is a longer strategy, because that will take some time. You need to get all the regulatory permission to do that, and then obviously set up the trial. So that's a longer term prospect. But in the short term, the detection and diagnosis is what we're focusing on.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame, isn't it, Prof? Because this would have been then the perfect bridge between now and finding a vaccine. But obviously there are those very essential and very real limitations in place in terms of research and tests and so on.
Yes, you're correct that there is a limitation, but remember that a lot of this can be accelerated, with partnerships and collaboration. So certainly, if it was possible to collaborate with other groups in South Africa or elsewhere in the world, and if there was more funding available, the process can be accelerated, as we've seen with the vaccine. The vaccine's been accelerated from years, to within a year and 2 months. So it's possible for us to do that, and certainly will be an important bridge between for the vaccine, before the vaccine arrives. And we also don't know how successful the vaccine will be, and that's another problem.
Yeah. Listen, let's hope that the right people are watching this interview with some very, very deep pockets. Professor, you were talking a little earlier on about President Donald Trump's, so-called miracle treatment for when he'd contracted COVID-19 at a cost of a few R100,000 per dose of what the president received. I mean, you're talking about, in the research that I've got here in front of me, with these nanobodies, that cost comes down to around R50,000 per dose. It's still not exactly cheap, is it, Prof?
No. What I said was a few thousand rand.
Is
so
it a few
probably
thousand?
You're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 rand, for a severely ill patient who needs treatment to actually stop the acceleration of COVID. So that's the difference we're talking about. So,
wow.
3,000 rand versus 200,000 rand.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, Prof, you were talking about being able to pour more money into this research so that perhaps we can cut down the time frames. It can get to a stage where the nanobodies are a bridge between now and finding a vaccine. Is that really sort of the preventative now, or the thing that's prohibiting that from happening, the issue of funding?
Yes, that's a very, very significant obstacle and a significant hurdle. I mean, that's really, in South Africa, obviously, there are lots of funding constraints, and we're nowhere near the capacity of, say, the Chinese or the Americans to actually move this research forward. So funding is very, very critical, and so it's important that if there are donors or sponsors out there that, who would be incentivized to fund this research, as it's very important, that would significantly accelerate the progress.
Well, let's hope, as I said, Prof, that the right people are watching. Thank you very much for your time this morning on the AM report. Some good news in the fight against COVID-19. Professor Tahir Pillay is head of the pathology and chemical pathology at the University of Pretoria. Quite an interesting story there around nanobodies, a much cheaper alternative to the antibodies treatment we've also heard about.